Do I take any supplements as a 15-year-old bodybuilder? Yes, let me show you what to take. I'm currently on 15 milligrams a day of Rag 140, also 25 milligrams a day of MK677.
What's up guys, Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be talking about 14 and 15-year-olds using SARMs on TikTok. So this is something I got a bunch of people sent me actually, is not just this account I'm going to be reacting to, but there were several. And I guess, TikTok is a very young skewing platform, and it seems like there are a lot of individuals who are trying to break into the fitness niche with the platform, which is, great. The platform obviously has a lot of viral organic reach, and it's a great platform to build off of if you're starting fresh, in my opinion. But some of these like young up and coming guys who want to become big are, noticing that the top influencers on the platform, for example, like Bryce Hall, fucking whoever else, whatever the other guy was that I reacted to, Griffin Johnson, those kind of guys, some of them are purportedly, or maybe, a lot of people speculate that they are using SARMs, and they joke about them all the time. And expectedly this influences a lot of young kids who want to build up their social presence as quickly as possible to use stuff that helps them build their physique and get to that Bryce Hall look, so then they can blow up on the platform too. So you have a lot of these kids who are like the thing I thought when I made content is, okay, this is great that social media is here and we can actually get all the risks and knowledge out in the open earlier. So people are going to start roids later because they know of all of the risks that come along with it and when it makes sense to actually deploy them in an intelligent manner. But what we're seeing is actually the opposite. You're seeing people start even younger than they used to, or it's just no different at all. Maybe, I guess there was a lot of guys that did start at like 16, 17 back in the day too. But I mean, even with the information available, people are still starting at like fucking 15 years old. It's insane. So the main account people have been sending me is Getting Gains. And this seems to be a group of multiple individuals rather than just one. And the thing that kind of sucks is that we're going to be using them as an example, and they're supporters of the brand. Like, they use gorilla mode. And I was like, I don't hate that they're, people use that they're supporters, but I mean, like, they're way too young to be using any of this shit. And it was just disappointing to see SARMs being deployed at such a young age. So anyways, the first video is this guy is talking about, do you use any subs?
Do I take any supplements as a 15-year-old bodybuilder? Yes, let me show you what to take. I'm currently on 15 milligrams a day of Rag 140, also 25 milligrams a day of MK677. Gotta have a good pre-workout.
So there's the gorilla mode.
Some basic protein powder, special sauce, has creatine. Do I take any supplements?
Okay, so I'm gonna re-listen to that again. So he said the RAD 140, I don't know if he said 50 or 15.
As a 15-year-old bodybuilder? Yes, let me show you what to take. I'm currently on 15 milligrams a day of Rag 140, also 25 milligrams a day of MK677.
Okay, regardless, I still can't even fucking tell myself, to be honest, but either way, you're on a dose that's going to shut you down at 15 years old. Actually, when he posted this video,
any supplements as a 15-year-old bodybuilder?
Okay, yeah, he was 15 here, so it wasn't 14, he was 15. Not that that's a whole lot better. So anyways, he is using a dose of RAD 140 and a dose of MK677 that, the MK is not going to have negative feedback with your HPTA. RAD 140, however, is going to crush your SHBG into the ground. It is going to cause an issue with your testosterone being suppressed significantly to the point where you are probably going to become hypogonadal, at least transiently, when you're 15 years old. So how is that going to affect things? Let's see what else. Like, this is his 1-year transformation. He mentions,
this gave me my 1-year transformation. So this is before I ever touched a weight in my life. I was always pretty fat. Then I didn't like how I looked, so I dieted down to like anorexic, 110 pounds. I started lifting. This was me about 3 months into lifting. Also me 3 months into lifting. Then school started and I got lazy, so I went to this. And I decided I want to put on some size, so I decided to dirty bulk and got to this, which was an awful idea. Also me at about 150 pounds. Over quarantine and summer this year, I shredded down to about 130, and this is where I am now.
Okay, so it's like, maybe you're getting to your goals a little bit quicker, but what are you doing to your body that, like, you're not in a phase where you need exogenous anabolics yet at all. Like, you just started, dude. And what's the problem with being this young and starting? Like, some people, they wonder, is it bullshit that you're going to stunt your growth? Is there any problem with it really? Or is it just a big myth that is, blown up and it really makes no difference? Here's a full day of eating as a 15-year-old on SARMs. All the comments are obviously just like, shitting on the guy. So anyways, like, what could be problematic about it? So you have to understand, when you're going through puberty, you only have a certain amount of time where your exposure to highly androgenic hormones is going to dictate literally how much development you have on many things, including your dank. So if you do not take advantage of this window of your dank growth, you could be in a position where, like, let's go to the extreme example. Guys who have 5-alpha reductase mutations in the actual gene that encodes for the enzyme. Those guys that have, like, pseudo hermaphrodites, what happens to them when they don't have any 5-alpha reductase converting DHT? They end up with micropenises. Like, that's what happens. They end up with, like, literally not developed nearly enough to almost be distinguishable. Like, you can tell it's a dick, but it's not even close to as developed as it should be. And they end up with, like, their life ruined by the lack of enough DHT, essentially. So how could, is this problematic with SARMs? You have to understand, if you're using like 15 milligrams or 50 or whatever the fuck it was of RAD140, when you shut down your total testosterone down into the double digits, probably, maybe triple digits, like low 100s, low 200s, maybe, if you're lucky. But like, I've seen guys with fucking double digit test levels on RAD140. When you get that low, do you have any DHT besides trace adrenals that are converting downstream? No, you don't. So during that entire cycle, you have no testosterone or DHT, and RAD140 is a SARM. It's a selective androgen receptor modulator designed to be way more tissue selective than testosterone, and especially more than DHT. In practical application, is it? Meh. At the end of the day, it's not going to develop the maturation of certain body parts and shit like dihydrotestosterone would. So, maybe for like 3 months, having no DHT is not going to, like, ruin your progress in your fucking penis growth. But you have to consider too, how long is your cycle? These guys are doing, 8 to 10 week cycles maybe. Then you have a phase where you're trying to do a PCT. And then they're cycling off, and then they're cycling back on something that suppresses them. So for like a significant portion of your puberty, like, you're only in puberty for like a handful of fucking years. Like, you have a handful of years of DHT exposure to grow as much as you physically can. And if you are literally crushing that process of 5-alpha reduction and testosterone production into the ground, you are literally potentially inhibiting yourself from getting to a fully matured state, and you might be end up like halfway between fucking micro and normal. Do you want that? No, it's a terrible idea. So even if you can recover your HPTA fine and you're not worried about, like, this is not even getting into, if you're depriving yourself of estrogen during your peak, development years too, like, how much, neurodegenerative outcomes could you encounter? Or should I say lack of development, I should say, not degeneration, but just like preventing yourself from actually fucking growing correctly. How much of that are you causing by shutting yourself down during these cycles, during your peak years that you actually need all of these processes to be upregulated and at their peak performance? Like, I don't really know for sure, but I certainly wouldn't want to fuck with it, especially when you only have a handful of years for certain things, like significant amounts of DHT exposure, where it's like so critical that you have, like, you're on point, like when you're at that age, the goal should be, in my opinion, and this gets into the estrogen conversation too, staying lean is very important. If you are fat, you are going to have excess aromatization, which is downstream going to lead to potentially premature growth plate closure. You're going to be inhibiting your literal stature long term if you let yourself get fat, and or you use certain drugs that are substrates for aromatase or whatever it is, or you use certain post-cycle therapy practices after your SARM usage that acts as an estrogen receptor agonist in the bone that causes premature development of that closure. So you have several different things going on here at one time. You have these phases where you're literally depriving yourself of androgens during the peak times at which it's absolutely fucking critical that you need them. The aromatase, the fat thing, I'm just like mentioning as like a tip, by the way, if you're young, the ideal scenario would be to stay as lean as possible. You know, like not within unreasonable territory. I'm not saying you need to be single digit shredded, like eat enough and be fucking healthy and grow properly. But I mean, like, don't be, if you're obese, there's a lot of motivation to not be obese because you're actually might be inhibiting your growth potential by having that excess aromatization, thus leading to premature growth plate closure, and or it's going to have negative feedback with your testosterone production, keep you at a lower test level because your brain is literally telling your body to not produce more tests because you have enough estrogen because you have too much fat sitting there. And as a byproduct of that, you're going to have less test and DHT, thus potentially inhibiting your fucking penis development, as well as actual muscle growth and bone development and all these other things. So there's a lot of fucking things at play here. And I certainly would not be fucking with the process when you are in your peak puberty years, regardless of how enticing it is to develop your physique early, regardless of how, you know, like transiently inhibiting these processes. Like maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal, you know, for 3 months, you know, out of the year, like how big of a deal is that? Well, it's like these guys are literally exposing themselves to the drugs, shutting themselves down, coming off, PCTing. Right when they're done PCT and they've recovered or perceived that they've recovered, they're going back on fucking LGD and RAD or something else. And like they're literally like their chunk of puberty years that they should be taking advantage of with endogenous hormones at their actual prime, they're like self-inducing like states of like androgen deficiency and or essentially castration with some of these modulators. And it's just a terrible idea in my opinion overall. And like, yeah, some guys, you know, there's a lot of bodybuilders who've taken steroids at a very young age and you could argue, yeah, they still grew to full height, but it's like, do you want to risk that, dude? You know? And it's like, I get, some of them are like, I don't know, like I just wouldn't want to fucking risk it, dude. Cause like you do actually see in the data, like for example, even when it comes to selective estrogen receptor modulators during a post-cycle therapy practice, like let's just say you use the SARM, you use RAD, you shut yourself down and you're thinking, okay, now I need the PCT. Like let's see, this guy is literally talking about full day of eating as a 15-year-old coming off cycle, PCT. Let's see if he talks about what his PCT is. Okay, never mind. He's just showing his food. He's not actually talking about PCT. So this is his diet when he is in PCT. So you have to understand too, like these kids are literally shutting themselves down, putting them in like an androgen deficient environment, as well as an estrogen deficient environment during that phase. And then afterwards, they're pushing these SARMs and or whatever they're using for PCT, which some of the stuff can be an agonist of the estrogen receptor in bone. So you actually could be prematurely developing these growth plate closures even with your PCT practices to recover from your fucking shitty state you induced upon yourself that might have led to the inhibition of other male characteristics to begin with. And then you prematurely inhibit potentially the actual bone growth of your entire stature in itself as well. Leading to the argument of the bodybuilders who, you know, grew to full height even though they used gear before. If you go look in the literature, you can find that women or, you know, teenage girls, if they're growing too much, they will administer them estrogen on purpose to get those growth plates to close as quickly as possible so they don't, you know, like overgrow and become too, you know, tall. Like that's one of the things they do. For men or, you know, teenage boys, one of the things they'll do is deploy aromatase inhibitors in conjunction with growth hormone. Now, you could argue that's in the context of a growth, you know, like a deficient child. The data does seem to reinforce that even when it's like somebody who's fucking overgrowing, you administer estrogen, all of a sudden it halts shit and causes that premature growth plate closure. So when you have a estrogen receptor agonist being introduced, like a Clomid, like a raloxifene, like a, you know, whatever it is that you're using, and you're putting your body in this fucking yo-yo environment of androgen deprivation, estrogen receptor agonism, blah, 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 you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable state to many different things that could probably lead to, maybe lead to, I don't know for sure, but, you know, the data suggests could lead to inhibited growth in not like just muscle, dude, but your fucking dick and your bones, which is like not a good risk to reward in my opinion. Like if you're going to do shit young, like at least wait until your growth plates have closed from natural development. And as far as like how you know, you can get into maximizing your potential growth and whatnot. Like I said, like one of the main things, you know, good diet, exercise, fucking be a healthy young teenager, don't be morbidly obese. A lot of these things are going to help you get to full height. And then if you want to look at exogenous anabolics after that, like at least fucking wait until you're done puberty, dude. Like, please. Like, even when you look at the breakdown of selective estrogen receptor modulators in the data, I thought at first maybe tamoxifen might have been more well tolerated and it might have just been clomid and raloxifene that were problematic. But it looks like tamoxifen is indicated for the treatment and prevention of breast cancer. It has an estrogen antagonist effect on breast tissue, but it also, similarly to clomid and raloxifene, an estrogen-like effect on lipids, bones, and endometrium. Tormorphine has an antagonist/agonist profile similar to that of tamoxifen. So you have these SARMs, which these kids are probably using their PCTs, that are literally agonists of the literal receptor that dictates premature growth plate closure. And you have to keep in mind, this is literally what is the point of administering estrogen to overgrown teenage girls. It's to induce this exact effect, get significant amounts of agonism of the estrogen receptor in bones to get that growth plate closure early. And when you actually look at the data, while you're not going to find this in humans, you can find tons of fucking rodent models, animal models where you have SARMs acting as an estrogen agonist on growth plates, not just on the estrogen receptor, like, oh, you know, that's like extrapolating, that's hardcore extrapolating, Derek. You see the same shit on growth plates that you would see with actual estrogen. It binds and activates the same receptor and can have these same downstream consequences potentially. So what is the takeaway from this? It is simply to be patient. It is, you know, especially if, like, at least, like, even as a teenager, you can very, very much argue that this is way too early if you're not even 20 yet, let alone if you haven't finished puberty. So at least finish like growing your actual like physical stature and your foundation that everything is going to be built off of. Don't put yourself in a potentially compromised position where you have, you know, like HPTA suppression that you have to recover from, and then some of the drugs you use to recover from that suppression are causing premature growth plate closure and all this kind of shit. Like, it's going to lead to potentially permanent consequences. Yeah, I want to quickly circle back to this raloxifene study in rabbit growth plates really quick, just to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Here we have E2 estradiol being compared right against raloxifene. The aim of the study was to determine whether raloxifene would act as an estrogen agonist or an antagonist on growth plate cartilage. Over ectomized immature rabbits were treated, so we're basically talking about castrates, were treated for 4 weeks with vehicle, estradiol, or raloxifene. Tibial growth velocity was decreased in both E2 and raloxifene treated animals, so the exact same growth inhibition effect. Compared with controls, estradiol and raloxifene treatment also decreased chondrocyte proliferation and the height of the proximal tibial growth plate. So the exact same thing, estrogen and raloxifene doing the exact same thing in the growth plate. In addition, E2, estradiol, and raloxifene hastened the fusion of the distal tibial growth plate and decreased the number of proliferative and hypertrophic chondrocytes per column in the proximal tibial growth plate. Again, both doing the same thing. As expected, the uterus was enlarged by estrogen, but not raloxifene treatment. We conclude that raloxifene acts as an estrogen agonist on the growth plate, accelerating growth plate senescence and thus hastening epiphyseal fusion. So that doesn't sound fucking good now, does it, guys? So you might be thinking, like, you know, maybe it's just partial. Like, maybe if you know, use the SARMs in post-cycle, when you go back to your teenage hormone levels and you're natural again, like the growth plate thing, it goes back to normal, and then you just keep growing like you normally would. It's not a problem, you know. It's the partial contribution is like negligible at the end of the day. It's like, well, like, do you want to risk that? Like, any part of like this progression to like full closure is not a reversible process. Like, even like when you have exposure to actual estrogen, it causes irreversible changes. So this is a study too where they did evidence that estrogen hastens epiphyseal fusion and cessation of longitudinal bone growth by irreversibly depleting the number of resting zone progenitor cells in female rabbits. So the findings are consistent with the hypothesis that estrogen causes irreversible depletion of progenitor cells in the resting zone, thus irreversibly accelerating structural senescence and hastening epiphyseal fusion. So obviously we don't want that. Ideally, in our teenage years, we don't want to be androgen deprived. We don't want to be estrogen deprived. We also don't want to be agonizing estrogen receptors in the bone directly on purpose via our PCT practices. Overall, it just seems like a bad idea for the short span of time that you have to actually develop to the max. Having several, like multiple month cycles of SARMs where you are depriving yourself of testosterone and DHT as well as estrogen. And you might think, oh, well, estrogen deprivation, well, that's a good thing then. You grow more. And it's like, but you're also inhibiting certain things in your body that are required for neurological health, cardiovascular health, different kinds of downstream cascades with GH and IGF-1. There's a lot of things that are dependent that are in a tightly regulated axis that you're fucking with when you're suppressing everything and then going on PCTs that are agonizing estrogen receptors right in the bone and then going back to a normal hormone profile that's like suboptimal and then jumping right back on suppressive compounds again. Like the whole thing is just like a recipe for disaster in my opinion. And maybe, the likely outcome I would bet is probably most people don't notice a big difference, but it's like, how can you predict that for sure? And how do we really know? Like we know for sure that DHT deprived individuals develop micropenises. We see that clinically. So why would the same thing not happen with SARMs? It's not like this, you're gonna literally rely on fucking LGD for your dick growth? Like, no thanks. So anyways, my opinion is that this is a bad idea. And any teenagers that are watching this, I would highly recommend against exogenous anything anabolics related that can cause suppression or is something that converts to estrogen or something that is going to have negative feedback or any of this kind of shit until you are definitely done growing, like at least that long. So that is my recommendation. Take from that what you will. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplates_moredates, Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to listen on audio instead of burn through your data at the gym or driving or whatever, you can drop a 5-star rating if you don't mind. It helps the podcast algorithm, I think. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. My TRT clinic, my recommended blood test panels for checking your biomarkers and your endocrine parameters, as well as Gorilla Mind, nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode, pre-workout formulas, and anything else I'm associated with. And my deep dives into bodybuilding pharmacology, by the way, if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, you're going to get sent those exclusively. If you don't sign up for that, you're not going to get sent them. So highly recommend you do. And you'll get private sale updates and whatnot for Gorilla Mind and other random stuff I'm associated with. So yeah, incentive to sign up for that for sure. And anything else I'm associated with, it's all in the video description below. So thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.